The old apple rolled to a stop against Elijah Carter's boot. He didn't pick it up. Instead, he stared across the silent orchard where hundreds of twisted trees stretched toward the gray morning sky. Their branches looked lifeless. Most people would have seen nothing but dead wood, cracked soil, and years of neglect. Someone behind him laughed. "You actually paid for this?" The words floated through the cold air. Another man folded his arms and shook his head. 20 acres of dead trees. $2,800 gone in one afternoon. A few more chuckles followed. Elijah bent down and picked up the apple. Its skin was wrinkled, soft in places, and covered with dust. Yet one small patch still shined deep red beneath the dirt. He slipped it into his jacket pocket without saying a word. The men watched him walk toward the broken farmhouse. None of them noticed the faded carving above the porch door. "Hope grows here." Most of the letters had almost disappeared. The last owner had nailed the place shut years ago. The windows were cracked. The roof sagged. Every step across the wooden porch answered with a tired groan. The county auction had lasted less than 15 minutes. No one else even raised a hand. The auctioneer had warned everyone. "No water. Most trees don't produce. The irrigation system is beyond repair. Property sold as is." People left before the papers were even signed. Only Elijah stayed. As he pushed open the front door, dust drifted through a beam of sunlight. The house smelled of old wood and forgotten seasons. One chair rested beside a cold fireplace. A cracked family photograph still hung on the wall. A little girl smiled while holding a basket full of bright apples. Someone had once believed this place had a future. Outside, a truck engine started. The former owner, Harold Bennett, waited beside the road. Was nearly 80, wearing a worn brown hat that had faded under decades of sun. He watched Elijah quietly. "You found the picture," Harold said as Elijah stepped outside. Elijah nodded. It was still hanging. Harold smiled for only a second. "My granddaughter refused to take it down." Silence settled between them. The wind carried dry leaves across the yard. Finally, Harold reached into his pocket. "I almost forgot." He held out a small brass key. It looked too old to fit anything modern. "The shed behind the orchard. I lost the other key years ago." Elijah turned it over in his hand. The metal felt strangely heavy. "What's inside?" Harold looked toward the rows of forgotten trees. "I haven't opened it in over 20 years. "Why not?" The old man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched the orchard as if expecting someone to walk out from between the trees. "My father always said." He stopped himself. Then he quietly smiled. "Never mind." He climbed into his truck. As the engine rumbled to life, he lowered the window. "People think this orchard died because the trees stopped giving fruit." He paused. "But orchards have secrets." Before Elijah could ask another question, the truck rolled away in a cloud of dust. Those words stayed behind. Orchards have secrets. That afternoon, Elijah walked every row. Some trees leaned sideways, others had split trunks. Grass covered old stone paths. Rusted tools lay half-buried beneath weeds. Near the back fence, he found the shed. It was smaller than he expected. Weather had turned the wood almost black. The roof leaned dangerously to one side. The brass key slid into the lock. It refused to turn. He tried again, nothing. Again, only a dry click. He leaned his shoulder against the old door. The hinges screamed. The door moved only an inch before stopping against something heavy inside. A cool draft escaped through the opening. It carried a smell unlike dust, fresh earth. Elijah frowned. How could fresh soil be inside a building sealed for decades? He pushed harder. The door opened just enough for him to squeeze through sideways. The room was almost dark. Broken shelves lined the walls. Old baskets hung from rusty nails. A wooden workbench sat beneath a cracked window. Everything looked exactly as time had left it. Everything, except one thing. Near the back wall, the dirt floor wasn't dry. It was damp. Elijah knelt. He pressed 2 fingers into the soil. Cool moisture clung to his hand. His eyes slowly lifted toward the stone wall behind the workbench. A faint sound drifted through the silence. Not wind, not mice, not the house settling. It was softer than that, almost impossible to hear. The quiet, steady sound of running water. The sound was so faint that Elijah held his breath to make sure he wasn't imagining it. It came again, a slow, steady trickle beneath the silence. He brushed away a layer of damp dirt near the stone wall. His fingertips found a narrow crack running between two large rocks. Cool air slipped through it, carrying the clean scent of moving water. He stood and looked around the shed. Nothing seemed unusual except the workbench pressed tightly against the wall. Its legs were thick oak, worn smooth by years of hard work. Rusted pruning shears, empty seed jars, and a cracked lantern still rested on top as if someone had planned to return before sunset. Elijah grabbed one end and pushed. The bench refused to move. He planted both boots against the floor and shoved harder. The old wood scraped across the dirt with a deep groan. Dust swirled through the narrow beam of light from the window. Behind the bench, hidden beneath decades of cobwebs, was a small wooden door no taller than his waist. There was no handle, only another keyhole. Elijah stared at the brass key in his hand. "It can't be." He slid the key into the lock. This time it turned easily. The latch clicked. He pulled the little door open. A rush of cool air rolled over his face. Stone steps disappeared into darkness. The sound of running water grew louder. For a long moment, Elijah didn't move. The orchard outside was silent. The sky had turned orange with evening. He reached for the old lantern on the bench. It was empty, but a small flashlight in his truck would do. Minutes later, its narrow beam cut through the darkness as he stepped carefully underground. Each stone stair was damp. Drops of water echoed somewhere below. The air felt 10 degrees cooler than outside. At the bottom, the passage opened into a narrow tunnel lined with stacked stone. Moss covered the walls, glowing faintly under the flashlight. Then he saw it. Crystal clear water flowed through a channel carved into solid rock. It wasn't a stream. It was an underground spring. Elijah crouched beside it. The water moved steadily, clear enough to see every pebble beneath the surface. He dipped both hands in. Cold, fresh, alive. His heart began to pound. At the county auction, they had repeated the same words over and over. No water. If this spring had flowed all these years, why had no one known, or had someone kept it hidden? His flashlight swept farther down the tunnel. The stone channel continued into darkness. Beside it lay old iron pipes, wooden valves, and hand-built gates covered with rust. Someone had engineered this place. Someone had spent years building it. Elijah followed the tunnel until it reached a round stone chamber. In the center stood a large iron wheel connected to several underground pipes. He brushed away dirt from a brass plate bolted to the frame. The engraving was still readable. Bennett Family Irrigation System, built 1958. He smiled despite himself. This orchard was never dry. Footsteps suddenly echoed above him. Elijah froze. Someone was walking through the shed. He switched off the flashlight. Darkness swallowed the tunnel. The footsteps stopped. A wooden floor creaked overhead. Then came two unfamiliar voices. "I told you he wouldn't last a day." A second man laughed quietly. "Doesn't matter. By next month he'll be begging to sell." Elijah remained perfectly still. Dust drifted from the ceiling as the men moved around the shed. One of them rattled the outer door. "Nothing in here but junk." "You sure? The old man emptied everything years ago." Their footsteps slowly faded. A truck engine started outside. Silence returned. Elijah waited another full minute before switching the flashlight back on. His pulse still hadn't settled. Who were they? How did they know he was here? And why did they care whether he kept the orchard? He climbed back into the fading evening light. The orchard looked different now. The twisted trees no longer seemed dead. They looked like they were waiting. As he locked the shed, something caught his eye near the porch of the farmhouse. An elderly woman stood at the edge of the yard, holding a small basket covered with a cloth. She smiled gently when Elijah approached. "I baked too much cornbread," she said. "Thought your first night might be easier with a warm meal." Elijah thanked her and accepted the basket. Before leaving, she glanced toward the orchard. "Harold ever tell you about the North Hill?" "No," her smile faded. "Good. She turned toward the road. Don't go there after sunset. Elijah frowned. Why? She stopped walking but never looked back. Because every family that owned this orchard eventually learned the same lesson. The evening breeze carried away her final words before he could ask another question. When the trees start whispering, someone is finally listening. The last words stayed with Elijah long after the woman disappeared down the gravel road. When the trees start whispering, someone is finally listening. He looked toward the north hill. It rose gently beyond the orchard, its trees standing closer together than the others. Evening shadows gathered there first, turning the hill almost black while the rest of the orchard still caught the last orange light. He thought about walking there. Instead, he carried the basket into the farmhouse. The kitchen was exactly as the last family had left it. A cast iron stove stood against one wall. Empty shelves collected dust. A cracked window looked over the orchard, where the wind rocked the branches in slow waves. As he ate the warm cornbread, his eyes drifted back to the old family photograph resting on the table. The little girl holding the basket of apples. Something about the picture felt different now. He picked it up. The frame was heavier than it looked. Turning it over, he noticed one corner had been repaired years ago with tiny brass nails. Curious, he pressed gently against the back panel. It shifted. Inside the frame, folded carefully beneath the photograph, was a yellowed piece of paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a hand-drawn map. The orchard had been divided into numbered rows, but one section near the north hill had been circled in dark pencil. Beside it, someone had written only 4 words. First trees, never remove, no signature, no date, just those 4 words. Elijah folded the map and slipped it into his jacket beside the old apple he had picked up on his first morning. Outside, the wind had grown stronger. Branches rubbed together with a soft, scraping sound. For a brief moment, it almost sounded like distant voices. He smiled at himself. You're letting old stories get into your head. The next morning began before sunrise. Elijah borrowed a chainsaw from a neighbor and spent hours clearing dead brush between the rows. Every fallen branch revealed another forgotten path. By noon, sweat soaked through his shirt. His hands were blistered. Progress came slowly. Every small victory uncovered another problem. Broken irrigation lines, collapsed fences. Rotting wooden posts, the orchard fought every attempt to bring it back. Late in the afternoon, a pickup truck rolled onto the property. A man stepped out wearing polished boots and dark sunglasses. Unlike everyone else in town, he wasn't smiling. He looked around carefully before walking toward Elijah. You bought this place? I did, the man nodded. I'm Grant Lawson, he offered his hand. I own the packing company over in Mill Creek. Elijah shook it. Grant glanced across the orchard. I'll save us both some time. He reached into his coat pocket and removed an envelope. I'll give you $5,000 today. Elijah looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. For what? For the property. You've only owned it 2 days, Grant shrugged. Sometimes business moves fast. Elijah smiled politely. I'm not selling. Grant didn't seem disappointed. Instead, he looked almost interested. You sure? Very. Grant tucked the envelope away. If you change your mind, my offer won't stay this high. As he walked back toward his truck, he stopped beside one of the oldest apple trees. He placed his hand against its trunk for several seconds, not admiring it, checking it, almost as if he expected to find something hidden beneath the bark. Then he drove away. Elijah watched until the truck disappeared beyond the hill. $5,000, nearly double what he had paid, for an orchard everyone called worthless. The numbers didn't make sense. That evening, Elijah unfolded the old map again. Grant had touched the exact section marked with the words, "First trees, never remove." A cold breeze drifted through the open window. His eyes lifted toward the north hill. This time, curiosity won. The climb wasn't steep, but years of weeds had hidden the narrow trail. As the sun slipped below the horizon, the light turned golden. At the top stood 12 enormous apple trees unlike any others in the orchard. Their trunks were wider, their bark darker. Despite years of neglect, every branch stood strong. At their roots lay smooth stones arranged in a perfect circle. Someone had cared for this place, recently. Elijah knelt beside one of the stones. Fresh footprints marked the soft earth. Not his, not old, only a day or two old. Someone else had been here. He followed the footprints until they stopped beside the largest tree. Carved into its trunk were two small initials. E.C. Elijah frowned. Those were his initials, Elijah Carter. His fingers traced the weathered carving. Impossible. The cut was decades old, long before he was born. A sudden crack echoed somewhere deeper in the orchard. He turned sharply. Between the trees below, he caught the brief outline of a person standing perfectly still. Watching him, the figure disappeared before Elijah could call out. Only silence remained, and somewhere beneath the roots of the oldest trees, he heard the faint, familiar sound of running water once again. The figure was gone before Elijah could take a second step. Only the evening wind moved between the old trees. He hurried down the hill, following the place where he had seen the shadow. Dry leaves cracked beneath his boots. Branches brushed against his shoulders. Every few steps he stopped, listening. Nothing, no footsteps, no voices, only the distant song of crickets and the steady whisper of the hidden spring beneath the ground. When he reached the largest tree again, he noticed something he had missed before. A fresh shovel leaned against the trunk. Someone hadn't simply visited the hill. Someone had been digging. The soil nearby was darker than the rest, as though it had been turned over only a day earlier. Elijah knelt and brushed away loose dirt with his hands. The shovel struck something hard, not stone, wood. He dug carefully until the corner of a weathered cedar box appeared beneath the roots. Its lid had almost rotted away. The metal hinges crumbled when he lifted it. Inside were dozens of folded papers wrapped in oilcloth to keep out the moisture. There was also a small leather notebook. The cover carried the same initials carved into the tree. E.C. Elijah frowned again. Different handwriting, different time, yet the same initials. He opened the notebook carefully. The first page read, "If you are reading this, the orchard trusted you before the town ever did." His heart skipped. The next pages weren't personal memories. They were hand-drawn maps, water channels, stone tunnels, measurements, notes about rainfall. Every page described the underground spring and the hidden irrigation system. Near the final pages, one sentence had been underlined twice. "Never let the packing company control the water." Elijah stared at those words. Packing company. Grant Lawson owned the packing company. A truck engine suddenly echoed from the road below. Headlights swept across the lower orchard. Grant's black pickup rolled slowly through the open gate. He wasn't alone. Another truck followed behind. Elijah quickly closed the notebook and slid everything back into the cedar box except the map. Carrying the notebook inside his jacket, he moved quietly downhill, staying behind the rows of trees. The truck stopped near the farmhouse. Grant climbed out first. Two men joined him. One carried rolled-up papers. The other held a metal survey marker. Elijah stayed hidden behind a thick apple tree close enough to hear. Grant pointed toward the orchard. "The county meeting is next week." One of the men nodded. "Once the permits are approved, nobody can stop the pipeline." Pipeline. Elijah leaned closer. The surveyor unfolded a large map. It stretched across the hood of the truck. Even in the fading light, Elijah recognized the blue line crossing his property. It wasn't a property map. It showed underground water, the spring. Grant tapped one spot with his finger. "This source is stronger than the river during dry summers." The second man looked uneasy. "What if the new owner finds it?" Grant smiled calmly. "He won't. And if he does," Grant's voice became quieter, "then we'll buy the orchard." He already refused. "Everyone has a price." Silence followed, then Grant folded the map. "If he won't sell, taxes will eventually do the job." The trucks drove away as quietly as they had arrived. Elijah remained frozen behind the tree. The orchard had never been worthless. The water beneath it was, not the apples, not the land. The spring, back inside the farmhouse, Elijah spread the notebook across the kitchen table beside the family photograph. Hours passed. Every page answered one question and created another. The Bennett family hadn't built the spring. They had protected it for generations. One entry caught his attention. The water belongs to every orchard downstream. Never close the gates unless every family agrees. Elijah unfolded another hidden page tucked inside the notebook. A list of names. Nearly 30 local farms, each connected to the same underground system. His orchard wasn't feeding only itself. It had quietly supplied water across the valley for decades. No wonder Grant wanted the land. Owning the spring meant controlling every farm during a drought. A loud knock shattered the silence. 3 slow knocks. Elijah closed the notebook immediately. When he opened the front door, Harold Bennett stood there holding a flashlight. The old man's face looked older than ever. "I hoped you hadn't found it yet," he said softly. "You knew about the spring." Harold nodded. "I did. You knew someone wanted this land." Another quiet nod. Harold looked past Elijah toward the orchard. "They've been trying to buy this place for almost 15 years. Why didn't you tell me?" The old man lowered his eyes. "Because I needed to know whether you came here looking for money." He looked back up. "Or whether you came here willing to protect something bigger than yourself." Before Elijah could answer, headlights appeared once again at the end of the gravel road. This time there were 4 trucks, and they weren't slowing down. 4 trucks rolled through the open gate, their headlights cutting across the orchard like bright white knives. The engines stopped. No one stepped out right away. Harold stood beside Elijah without saying a word. The old man held his flashlight tightly, but its beam pointed toward the ground. "They're here sooner than I expected," he whispered. Truck doors opened one after another. Grant Lawson walked forward, calm as ever. Behind him came 3 men carrying survey equipment and folders instead of shovels or chains. They looked more like businessmen than strangers sneaking onto someone's land. Grant smiled politely. "Evening, gentlemen." Elijah remained on the porch. "This is private property," Grant nodded. "It is for now." He handed Elijah a folded document. "I came to make one last offer." Elijah didn't open it. "I'm not selling." Grant looked almost disappointed. "I was hoping you'd say yes before tomorrow." "Why tomorrow?" Grant glanced toward the orchard. "Because once the county approves the new water rights, keeping this place will become difficult." Harold finally spoke. "You've known about the spring all along." Grant didn't deny it. "My grandfather helped map this valley after the war." He pointed toward the dark rows of trees. "That water could support hundreds of acres, modern farms, better roads. New jobs. And who controls the water?" Elijah asked. Grant's smile faded. "My company." Silence settled over the yard, then Harold slowly stepped forward. "My father made me promise something before he died," Grant sighed. "I know. He said the spring belongs to everyone." Grant shook his head. "Promises don't feed towns anymore." "No," Harold answered quietly, "but they keep neighbors from becoming enemies." Grant looked at Elijah one last time. "I'll double my offer." No answer. "I'll pay $15,000. Still nothing. Finally, Elijah spoke. "I didn't buy this orchard because it was valuable." Grant raised an eyebrow. "I bought it because everyone else stopped believing in it." For the first time, Grant looked uncertain. He took the papers back and returned to his truck. "You'll regret this." The convoy disappeared into the night. The next morning began before sunrise. Harold unlocked a small cabinet inside the farmhouse. From it, he removed a stack of weathered ledgers, old county maps, and signed agreements dating back more than 60 years. Every document told the same story. The spring had never belonged to one family. It had always been shared. Every neighboring farm had signed the agreement. Over the next 2 days, Elijah and Harold drove from one farm to another. Some doors opened slowly. Some people remembered the old agreement. Others had never heard of it. But each family recognized the Bennett name. One by one, they agreed to attend the county meeting. The courtroom was small. Wooden benches filled quickly. Grant arrived with lawyers. Elijah carried only the leather notebook, the old maps, and the faded family photograph. When his turn came, he placed the notebook on the table, then the signed agreements, finally the photograph. The judge looked puzzled. "What is the purpose of the photograph?" Elijah smiled. "To remind us this wasn't built by companies." He looked around the room. It was built by families. Harold explained how the hidden irrigation system supplied farms across the valley during dry summers. Several older farmers stood and confirmed the story, one after another. Memories that had almost disappeared returned. The courtroom grew quiet. Grant's lawyers argued about ownership. They argued about development. They argued about profit. But they couldn't erase 60 years of signed agreements. Late that afternoon, the ruling finally came. The underground spring would remain protected. No single company could control it. The historic water-sharing agreement would stay in effect. A quiet sigh spread through the room. No cheering, no celebration, just relief. Summer arrived. For weeks, Elijah worked from sunrise until sunset. He repaired broken fences, cleared dead branches, opened the old underground channels exactly as the notebook described. Cold spring water flowed beneath the orchard once again. Slowly, the trees began to change. Tiny green leaves appeared, then blossoms. Then hundreds of them. The orchard wasn't dead. It had simply been waiting. Neighbors started stopping by, not to laugh, to help. One family repaired the barn roof. Another donated fencing. Someone else brought young apple trees. Children filled buckets with fresh water from the spring. Laughter slowly replaced silence. One cool autumn morning, Elijah reached into his jacket. The old apple was still there, wrinkled, dry, almost weightless. The first apple he had picked on the day everyone laughed at him. He carried it to the North Hill. Using the seeds inside, he planted a single new tree beside the oldest row. Harold watched with a quiet smile. "Think it'll grow?" Elijah covered the seeds with fresh soil. "I think hope usually does." Months later, the first visitors arrived to buy apples, then more. Soon the small roadside stand couldn't keep up. Families returned every harvest. Children ran between the rows just as they had in the old photograph. The faded words above the farmhouse porch were carefully restored. "Hope grows here." This time everyone could read them. Years later, people still told the story of the man who bought the orchard everyone called useless. Most believed the miracle was the hidden spring. Some believed it was the old notebook. Others thought it was luck. But the people who worked beside Elijah knew the truth. The greatest thing growing in that orchard was never the apples. It was trust. Sometimes the world calls something worthless simply because it has forgotten how to see its value. The right person doesn't create that value, they uncover it. If this story touched your heart, I'd love for you to join me again for another journey. Until next time, take care, and never be too quick to walk away from something the world has already given up on.